Okay. Well, hello everyone. For those that are joining us for the first time, my name is Sonia and I am one of the co-founders of Disdash. Disdash is an online media site where we provide a foundation for all things that pertain to South Asians, be it politics, news, entertainment, and important topics such as the one this afternoon. So today, in addition to this webinar, we're also being streamed live on Sakshi TV. So a big hello to all the Sakshi TV viewers. Thank you so much for joining. I'd also like to give a little shout out to Puneet Parle, who introduced Disdash to the amazing woman of the hour. So without further ado, I'd like to say a big welcome to Tara Kaushal. Tara, thank you. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thanks, Puneet, for setting this up.
So for those of you, that are joining this, I know everyone was curious about Tara and just the experiences that she went through. We have so much to cover today, Tara, so I wanted to just jump right in and start asking you the questions. First of all, what made you want to talk about rape, and how did that become your topic of choice?
I think Why Men Rape was the culmination of a really long personal and professional journey. So apart from the sexual violence I experienced as a child, as a little child, and because my parents didn't know about it, it didn't really impact my life, and I'm not my freedoms or my lifestyle. But when I was 12, my parents moved from naval bases that are considered safe spaces to Noida as civilians. And at this stage, I think my parents became unduly concerned with my hymnlines and my deadlines and with my safety in general. And I think the questions that I started asking then, which I obviously weren't as articulated as they are today, was, why are the actions of men impacting my life and the lives of women? Why can't they stop? Why do they do what they do? I think has just led me down this path of writing about gender and sexuality and sexual violence. But the thing that made me decide that this was the book I wanted to do was the Delhi gang rape. So that happened in December 2012, and sometime in 2013, I decided that this was the book I was going to write.
And you're the Nirbhaya case, right, Tara?
Yeah, the Delhi gang rape is the Nirbhaya case. And so I think from 2013 to early this year is what I've done.
Now, once you actually started on this journey, talk to me about, first of all, how did you know who the rapists were? How did you get in touch with them? And also, how did you manage to, I guess, befriend them, get close enough to them where you were actually able to understand their psyche?
So when I set out searching for subjects, the first avenue I pursued was finding them and their identities through their survivors. And, so I put out a call on Facebook where my audience is mostly as privileged as I am. And there were all these friends who had told me their stories over the years and, stuff like that. And eventually I had this Excel sheet. Because gender violence follows class lines, and this is a theory I unpack in the book, I had an Excel sheet of 72 elite men or people like us who've raped. And as much as I didn't want to promote the Shakti Kapoor idea of rapists, like this,
Monster.
like monstrous men lurking in the bushes, waiting for some innocent girl to walk by. I also felt that these men, these 72 men, are also not representative of India. So while I didn't want to promote that idea, I also realized that this is a very small slice of India. So to find men from other social classes who had raped, I knocked on every door I could, from NGOs to the police, to local contacts, to the local media, and detective agencies. And eventually I found subjects across all social classes in the country. And the next question that you asked me was, how did I get close enough to them to
Yeah,
understand their
I mean,
psyche? So I went
weren't you
undercover.
scared before even doing that? What made you prompt to even want to spend time with a rapist? I would be terrified.
I think, okay, the reason I decided that I was going to do it this way is I've always said I'm not the expert. I'm a writer. And, while the conversation about gender violence is really evolved in the academic sphere, we're still talking about, what was she doing? How long was her skirt? Does she know the man? How late was it? So to me, in the masses, the conversation was not nearly as evolved. And so my role, or the role that I felt I was playing, was to make the important interesting, because I'm a writer. And at that stage, I felt that having narrative structure to actually meet people and talk to them was very important for my book. The fact that it became this big undercover thing that is, and of course, while I only set out to have some sort of a narrative structure for, for the book, and I didn't think that I would find too much that hadn't been said. That's not strictly true. So yes, that's why I did it. And was I afraid? I don't think I was. I was so excited about this whole adventure that I was on. I think a lot of people around me were more worried for me than I was.
Yeah, I would be too. So can you explain, I guess one by one, each of, because you went undercover with 9 rapists. Can you explain a little bit about each one and give a little, summary of what their background was?
Um, so how do I put it? Um, and I think I had set out to be, when I set out to find subjects, I had set out to be as demographically representative as possible, right? And in the traditional sense, money and, divide India into money and across the country. I just didn't find that, I found that if you look at poverty statistics in India, and urban rural statistics, I was going to go back, if I was representing India as a vertical slice, I was going to go back into being, representing the Shakti Kapoor idea of rapists, that the poor men rape and the rich don't, which is not something I believe at all.
Right.
And I think my hypothesis evolved into around social class. And I think social class in India can be described as an intersection between, religion, caste, the historicity and occupation of the family, education, language, culture, money, and location. So what I found was that men of different classes rape, and their reasons for rape are different across classes. And so in the section Angry Young Men, I go into the lives of men from the lower social class. And for them, there's a lot of anger. There's also an absolute lack of understanding of what rape and consent is the way we define it. And they take, I think, because we're talking about, all of these evolved concepts of stealthing and yes means yes. But if you take your ideas about gender and violence and the role of men and women from agrarian ideas or from religion, then you're situating them in patriarchy. And so then obviously marital rape is not rape because, women continue to be possessions. So there's that. And 5 of my subjects came from classes like this. And, uh, one of them was was 18 years old, and he had been involved in a gang rape under peer pressure from a cousin brother of his. The other was this lower caste man, whose entire life had been a rage against the machine, and there was certainly an element of power and other things that were part of his reasons for rape. There was another man who just thought who did not understand rape. He believed that rape was only when there was a knife involved or there were two or three men, but coercion, which was normal, which was a sexual extension to his romantic idea that na na karte pyar tum hi se kar baithe. If you look at a sexual extension of that, it does mean that you keep pushing until she says yes, or you have your way anyway. So there's that. So that's one kind of man. The other kind of man, and in my book, I've called them wolves in sheep's clothing. Now these men knew fully well. I mean, these are all the men who were involved in Me Too India and stuff like that. There is no way you can convince me that they didn't know what they were doing was wrong.
Right.
And they know fully well. And the thing is, when men like these, like the accused MJ Akbar, or actors or famous politicians or Harvey Weinstein, when they are predators, they are infinitely more dangerous because they are trusted. If you look at any crime as part means, part motive, part opportunity, they have the motive of course, but they have the means and the opportunity. So these men are infinitely more dangerous. And I met a journalist, and I also met, to me, the most dangerous and most difficult of my subjects, a really famous spinal surgeon who had raped a friend of mine who now lives in the States 25 years ago when she was 12 years old, and he'd raped her on her hospital bed and left her paraplegic after a surgery that he had helped conduct.
Wow.
So
wait,
yeah, that was my most difficult subject, most difficult interview.
So wait, Tara, he was a doctor, he performed surgery on her, and then he raped her?
That night, yes.
Oh my God.
That night.
Wow.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's still hard for me to digest. It was very hard for me to be in the same room with this man. So again, you had all of these Shakti Kapoor type of rape men who had raped, right? And I wasn't really afraid around them. But this man evoked the emotions that I didn't think I had. I was very, very, very distraught when I was interviewing him. And of course, I couldn't tell him.
So Tara, when you met with these, the doctor or, these men of lower class or upper class, who did they think you were? And why were you asking them these questions?
They thought that I was they thought I was researching a film. Okay. And that I was an NRI from Australia, and I was doing some film research in the established tradition of ABCDs, wanting to make movies in Bollywood. So that's what they thought I was doing, and it allowed me to.
But your subject matter was what?
Pardon?
And what did they think the subject matter of this movie that you were making was?
Oh, that was just something I made up. So
but I mean, my point is, what were they thinking your movie was on? Like, why would you be interviewing them if they're not openly out as a rapist, right?
No, I obviously didn't tell them that I'd identified them as a rapist, and that's why I was studying them, because that would never have gone anywhere.
Right. So what were they thinking?
They thought that I was researching a film, and in order to do this, I've identified this person through XYZ, and I've heard that you have an interesting life. Mm-hmm. And I also basically said whatever needed to be said. So when I spent time with this political henchman in Bhopal, I told him I was making a movie like Gangs of Wasipur, or when it was in a village, it was like Peeply Live, or whatever, right? It was just a local film, and I adapted the subject matter to the subject that I was talking to. So that's what they thought I was doing.
Now, going back to the doctor that raped the poor 12-year-olds, you said that was your hardest person to kind of talk to and be around. How did you deal with that emotionally for yourself?
Oh, wow. I think there have been several times in my life that I have been depressed. Two of them were during like the 3 intense years that it. So I started or planning and reading for the book in 2013, but I only took it on full time in 2017. And between 2017 and 20, I found two stages where I was, you know, inordinately depressed. I couldn't cope. Um, and I would only say that I didn't seek therapy then, but I have now because I realized it's trauma that doesn't, that I thought I was okay, but it's trauma that doesn't really leave. I've just recently started therapy because I realized, for instance, the other day I got myself locked in my room, and um, my spouse was trying to open it, and it was a lot of noise. And I realized, because this was something that had happened to me, one of my scary bits when I was undercover when these men in Jammu were trying to break down my hotel room door. It was quite dramatic. And I thought I was all cool and blasé about it. But when all of this noise was happening outside my door, and I'm in a safe space, I'm in my home, I was really triggered, and I was saying, I can't cope with this noise and stop banging on my door. And he's like, listen, relax, just breathe. You're inside the room. I'm trying to open, like, this is all safe.
Right.
But I think I thought I was okay, but it's clearly not as easy as that. Um, but yeah, I'm getting better, and I think the book has been worth it in the long term, both for me as catharsis and whatever else that I set out for it to be for myself, but also because um, I'm seeing the response both from people in the academic space and from survivors and women. The book's doing really well, and I think perhaps if there's one person who looks at the book and says, okay, look, it's really, I'm not going to ask my daughter what time she's coming home or the length of her skirt. I'm actually going to educate my son to be a better human being. I think it would be worth it. So yeah.
That it comes down to a lot of that, right? How Indian or South Asian, I'm going to say, because it really expands, how South Asian men are raised, and it's a lot of times the mother or the women's fault, because they've also kind of have been grown up with this idea that the male is superior.
Mm-hmm. Well, patriarchy is not really a challenge between or fight between men and women. It's between the ideology of equality and patriarchy, which posits that the genders are different. There are only two genders, but that the genders are different, and men are superior. And women, for a whole variety of reasons, subscribe to that ideology as well. And we see this in, you know, the whole the whole narrative about mothers-in-law and daughters-in-law. Why should mothers-in-law be agents of patriarchy? You would imagine that, having experienced bad, like difficult times when they were, new bahus or new daughters-in-law, you'd imagine that that would mean sensitivity and love and all of these things. But that's not really what happens. And that's probably because it's easiest or it's most empowering to be on the side that seems to have the power, and to perpetuate and the power dynamic and be part of it. So no, I don't. Women are definitely agents of patriarchy, and I think it's really it defeats I don't see it. I don't see why. It just seems so illogical, but it is the way it is as well.
So Tara, when you and I last spoke, you had mentioned that you don't see these rapists as monsters per se. Can you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Look, when we situate rapists as monsters. We situate them as external. Then we go back to this whole idea of the other. And we also take away our responsibility or social responsibility in their creation and rehabilitation. So if we, I mean, rapists are very much among us. They are normal, often respectable men, as we have seen, and they are created. I mean, whether or not you want to discuss the nature versus nurture idea of creation, of the role of family, society, and culture. And I mean, I fall in the middle. I think both things are true. Nature, we are created through nature and through nurture. And nature being what it is, let's assume nature is one big part of it, of our psychology and how we are created. But there is a role that the media and culture and society and families play in our creation. And that's where we need to look at the men and boys that we are creating. And I think that where this leads me to is that we spend a lot of money, and we spend a lot of time and energy on NGOs for rape victims and rehabilitation, and all of that is valid and it is correct. We also talk about a law and order approach and how Indian laws need to be better, and again, that is valid and correct. But all of that is post fact, after the act.
Right.
What happens to the prevention part of this? I think that we need to focus a lot more on men and boys. We need to think about how we're bringing them up. We need to support NGOs that work with men and boys. So I think you cannot think that rapists are monsters because we created them. They don't look different. And if you say that they look different, then how do you explain the statistic that 95% of rapes are committed by somebody known to the victim? So then it's not stranger danger, which was the 1970s idea of rape that started in America. It's not stranger danger. It's someone you know. And so to you, they were never a monster. And therefore, there are lots of complicated ideas that emerge from this monster thing also, because then if you think they're monsters, then how do you deal with a complicated relationship that you often have with somebody who raped you? And that's often also your spouse. So then on the one hand, you're saying Pati Dev and you're keeping Karwa Chauth, and you also then think they're a monster. It becomes very complex. So I think we need to reinvent this whole idea of monster, and we also need to pay attention to how we created them and what role we've played in that.
Yeah, because like you said, it's a lot of nature versus nurture. So it's a very big component, both equally, I think. So Tara, tell me one thing you took away from this whole experience.
The one thing I took away from this whole experience is that things are infinitely worse than we imagine. Even if rape reporting has increased in the English media in India since the Delhi gang rape, rape reporting has increased by fourfold. We still don't know the worst of it. We don't know the half of it. Because also there are studies that have shown that 99.1% of rape is not reported to the cops, let alone the media. Mm-hmm. And then 85% of rapes, if the perpetrator is not the current husband, 85% of rapes by strangers and others are not reported to the cops. So it's way worse than we imagine. It's also going to get worse before it gets better. And there are several reasons for this, including the idea that women's emancipation is increasing. And violence is a sign of change in society. So There is a lot more violence to keep women in check, and it's going to increase. Um, there's a lot more pornography with no corresponding sexual education. So the idea of what is rape, what is consent, what is sex, what is love, all of these things are really difficult and fraught at the moment. But I think that eventually it will get better. That's my point. It's going to get worse, but it is, at the end of it, there will be a dawn when men have learned to accept the new reality of the way women are going to reclaim space, the role that women are going to play in society. But until such time, it's going to be a hard battle, and we're going to have to fight very hard for it.
So, as an educated person, and, all the people that have joined today, equally educated and well-versed on this topic, what you're saying makes sense. I'm just not sure how it equates to people that are not as educated. That's not a question. That's kind of just rhetorical. I'm just talking out loud. My other thought in this is, why should someone buy your book? What do you think they will, not for them, obviously you want them to buy it, but what do you hope that them buying this book, they might learn or might relate to something different?
Look, I learned a lot while studying for this book. Because, even though I did study feminism in college, gender violence is only a subset of feminism. And then I started studying it. So I learned a lot. And what I ended up having to do was process all of this information and see how it applied to the lives of my subjects, how it intersected with the lives of my subjects. And I think what I have tried to do is, make a lot of that, which I have to say, there was this super interesting essay, which was 5 pages long. And I realized even while I was reading it that, this is really important shit. It took me 2.5 weeks to understand what was being said. And later I realized that, though I chanced upon this essay in a very ad hoc fashion, it was a very, very important and iconic essay. But it literally took me 2.5 weeks to understand 5 pages.
And what did it entail?
Oh, it was just words that were really big. It was all about violence and the role of gender and all of that. But I think I've tried to process that into, a more mainstream understanding. It's also a cross-section, a vertical slice of India in general and Indian masculinity in particular. So it's not only about rape. I think people have come away with a deeper understanding of the way the country really works, because even us in urban, there are so many Indias living in so many centuries at once that even us in urban India, some of it is so hard to even fathom. Until I saw it, I couldn't believe it until I really saw it myself. So I think it's a book that will give you a deeper understanding into India and the gender dynamic, and men in general, not only about violence. It's also, I believe, a fun book. And this is something I was hoping to achieve, but I didn't think I would. So yeah, I hope people will read the book.
I'm surprised to hear you say it's a fun book. That sounds, thinking
yeah.
about,
I tried. I'm a fun person. So I was trying to make it, light and frothy. And I think I've succeeded in parts, because that's what all the reviewers and, people who are reaching out to me to talk about it. That's what a lot of people are saying, that I didn't expect to laugh, but I did. And I'm hoping that a lot more people feel that way. Yeah.
So I wanted to say to all the audience that's part of this panel today, please feel free to ask whatever questions you guys have. You could just type them in and I'll ask Tara as we're talking. So please have your questions come through. Tara, my other question with you is, from the 9 rapists that you spent time with, was there anyone in particular, besides the doctor, we already know he's pretty horrific, was there anyone else that really stood out, and why?
I would have to say it was this political henchman in Bihar. No, sorry, in Bhopal. Um, and I was telling you about the three social classes. So we've done angry young men, and then we've done wolves in sheep's clothing, which I said was the really rich men who were trusted. But there's also this section called the worst of both worlds, where I discuss people in the middle class, and it's a growing class, where there's upward mobility and people are escaping poverty and then coming into positions of power. And to me, what was emblematic of this class is, when Me Too happened in India in 2017 and then 18, one of the stories that caught my eye was garment factory workers in Bangalore were saying stuff like, okay, great, Me Too and all, but this is what we've dealt with historically. In order to get our salaries, our supervisors expect us to sleep with them, and this has always been the case. And so you take ideas about power and about women and about the gender dynamic, and you take them from traditional ways of being, and then you put yourself and men like this in positions of power. Men who don't understand the idea of consent, men who still see women as possessions, men who equate power with the ability to men who equate power with the ability to have their way with women. So this political henchman in Bhopal had come from deep poverty, and he had then become quite senior in the hierarchy of. Sorry, my cats just decided to walk all over me. 1 second. Sorry. Want to say hi? Brittany? Say hi. That's my cat.
Oh,
She has sent me away. So anyway, he'd come from extreme poverty. So not only did he not have any sort of gender training, he also had huge power issues, and like there was a lot of violence in his childhood. Both at home and in the environment, in school and through older boys. And so he was telling me stuff like, I don't even know what rape is, and I don't even know that rape exists. And he talked about how he, as a 30 or 32-year-old, was having sex with and raping, but he was talking about it quite casually as sex, but 13 and 14-year-olds. And I also know that, his gang and him would chance upon couples at night, and, beat up the men and force the woman. So this man was really prolific and had no fear of the law. And so I was really happy to hear that after we'd met, that he's ended up in jail. I think he's still in jail, but not for a sexual crime, because most of his sexual crimes were unreported. He's in jail for a political crime. And I'm happy, because he's beyond redemption. I don't think a man like that will change.
Now, Tara, do any of these men ever come to an understanding of their actions, or ever feel any sort of remorse? And how do you communicate with the patriarch, mentality? And this is a question that just came through.
So most men, there have been a lot of studies about remorse. And it's been found that most men who rape, even in the prison system, where a lot of these studies have been conducted, find, even if they're convicted and they're in jail for rape, they find the act rewarding. So, and this is a quote. So when they're not caught and they have no repercussions, can you imagine how infinitely rewarding they find it?
Right. I got away with it, I can do it again.
Yeah, and they're emboldened and empowered, and yeah. So no, they don't find it. I mean, I didn't find remorse, even with the men who confessed, who told me that they had raped women. I didn't find any remorse.
Now, that doctor that you had spoken about earlier, I wonder how many other patients he must have done that to.
This is of
I'm still baffled by it because he just performed surgery and oh my God. And what happened to that poor girl? Is she okay? Or I mean, she's not okay, but I mean,
so she and I met in 2007, and we became really close friends instantly, because that's how my friendships form, and we became really close friends. And she was on a wheelchair. And then she told me that she had not always been on a wheelchair. And I said, okay. And I just let it be, because this was, yeah. And that, she told me that she'd had surgery when she was 12 in 1995, and that it had gone wrong, and it was a minor spinal thing, and everyone was expecting her to turn out okay, and she didn't. And that was fine. And then a little while later, we went off on holiday, just she and I, just this girls' holiday. And we were getting drunk one night. And then she looks at me and says, the story that I told you about why I'm on a wheelchair? I said, yeah. She said, it's not entirely true. I said, okay. And she said that she had been, that yes, there was a minor spinal defect, and yes, surgery had failed, and all of those things had happened, but it was not, the stitches had come undone because the resident doctor who had assisted in the surgery had raped her that night as she was, in her hospital bed, on painkillers. And so my instinct, like, of course I bawled, but my instinctive reaction was, let's do something. And I couldn't process it, right? My whole thing was, let's do something. And I remember being on a Bombay train and on the phone with her saying, let's do something, babe. And she said, at some point she had enough of me, because I was still processing it.
Right.
And she said, and I remember her snapping at me saying, look, that's your personality type. You want to deal with everything heads on and deal with stuff.
Right.
I just want to forget. And so even now, when I reached out to her in 2017 for his details, she said, I don't want to tell you anything because I've only ever told you and my spouse, and I don't want to do this. And I said, well, anyway. So she's okay. But my point also with this, and you asked me how she was, is that one of the things I have realized is that there are as many ways to process child sexual abuse and rape as there are survivors of child sexual abuse and rape. So when you talk about survivors, right, you're always, or victims, we're always saying, did she fight back? And fight seems to be the only valid response. Did she scream, bachao, bachao? And, that's what we think should happen during rape and after. But there's freeze, and there's flight, there's even an attempt, what they call friend, where you try to talk to your attacker. So there are very many ways to deal with the act of being violated, but there are also very many ways to process it. So this particular friend decided at some point that she only wanted, the only way to deal with what she had gone through was to be really wealthy. That was her thing. She said that I feel that if my mother had been if my parents had been able to afford a private room and my mother had been in the room with me, it would not have happened.
Right.
So I want to make my golden cage for myself. And she's succeeded, and she doesn't want to talk about it. But she's super wealthy and super successful, and as a business person, and that's one way of dealing with it. My point is, not only is the way you process the act different for everybody, but we also have to deal with or understand that the way people deal with trauma is also different. And that's the other thing, people imagine that women behave like zinda lashes and, like living corpses. And
Right.
none of it is true. Some want to fight back, and some want to write books about it, and there's various ways of dealing with it. So,
So now I
yeah.
have some questions coming in. Someone's asking, while changing the rape culture is more of a longer term process, what are some short term things we can do to help those, in a less fortunate situation who can't fight for themselves?
I mean, are we talking in a legal sense? Economically, I would suggest, if you're talking about helping people, I would suggest contributing not only to women's NGOs, but contributing to NGOs that work with men and boys. And one in Bombay does one called Men Against Violence and Abuse. Mava in Bombay does some spectacular work. There's Men Engage. There's a lot of them, so you can choose. But if you're talking about the less fortunate, that's the only route to go. Also, I think we should put our money where our mouth is. So we need to not pay to watch movies like Kabir Singh. we need to we need to challenge things in our families. And I agree also with you that rape culture is something that's longer term, and the bigger picture. But we're all agents of culture, we're all agents of change, we are culture, we are society, and therefore we are change.
Well, it's funny you
And
brought up Kabir Singh, Dara, because a lot of people who saw that movie didn't think anything was wrong with it.
oh my
They just say,
God,
oh, it's such a good movie. And there's so many facets of it where you're like, oh my God.
we need a whole different panel where I can just bitch about these things and discuss
But I
it.
think Bollywood in general, right? I remember growing up watching all these movies where every other girl was getting raped, and I just thought it was normal. Like, we didn't think anything of it.
Yeah, I also, as we were discussing just before, just today, I was reminded of that song about खिड़की पे आऊं ना बाहर ना जाऊं कैसे मैं सारा दिन घर पे बिताऊं something दीवाने तो दीवाने हैं. And when you were younger you sang along, but now I am like, that's what you call sexual terrorism. This woman is trapped in her house because men are outside the door. Like, come on, that's not normal.
That's like I was telling you, I saw Dostana the other day, the old Amitabh, Shatrughan Sinha, Zinat Aman movie. And there's a scene right in the beginning of the movie where she's wearing a little bikini and some guy is bothering her. So she comes to, the police officer who happens to be Amitabh. And she's like, oh, this guy's bothering me. And he's like, well, yeah, look at what you're wearing.
Yeah, I mean, slut shaming, stalking, all of these things. You look back and you're like, dude, this is so problematic. And then Kabir Singh happens in 2019, so I don't even think we need to go that far.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Another question here. What do you believe is a leading issue of the nurture of boys and men that is giving rise to normal people, not monsters, becoming abusers and rapists? And how could one prevent that issue?
Okay, so there's obviously this whole idea of patriarchy, and that boys are better than girls and have rights over their siblings, rights to food, rights to healthcare, rights to education over their siblings. Okay, and that's one whole aspect of why they're raised this way, and why, and it's pretty easy to change, really. It's just small things, but it is really, really easy to change. For instance, there's this, I don't know how many of you are familiar with Kamla Bhasin, who's a really iconic feminist in India. And she has this line, which has always resonated with me and seems to resonate at every level of society, which is, keep your beti in your will, but in your dil, but also in your will. So, I mean, these are small things. We don't even think about it, but and and, food and education. So patriarchy is one whole aspect that, we need to unpack at every level. We're so indoctrinated, and it's in every system, whether it's the kanyadan during a marriage ceremony. It's everywhere, and it's systematized, and it's everywhere. But the other thing that if you ask me, and several people have asked me to think about this of late, if you ask me about the one thing that we need to stop that will prevent gender violence and prevent boys from becoming abusers as they grow older, it is no to domestic violence and no to corporal punishment. This whole spare the rod and spoil the child, which has come down from centuries in different cultures and different religions. You believe that the way to instill discipline in a child is through violence.
Right.
It's wrong. And you think it's small, but it actually causes so much damage, because boys learn early on that there's an association between violence and power. As soon as I become big, this is what I can do to people less powerful than me. They dissociate. They also start to distrust other people. It shakes their sense of their foundations, especially if it's somebody they love and trust. So if you ask me, the one smallest thing that we can actually tackle to prevent rape culture, it's the violence that boys themselves experience as children. So that to me is a really big one. And, this is historic wisdom, right? That you feed children. And it has been discredited from so many avenues, whether it's psychological or gender or for gender violence. It's just the wrong thing for children to experience.
So Tara, tell me, what do you have in store next?
So while I'm also working on part 2 of Why Men Rape, and I really don't know what that is. I have all of this research and I have no idea how I'm going to tackle it. So there's a pin in that. But there's a documentary that's going to follow Why Men Rape. There's all of which is also happening, but I'm working on a book at the moment about this boy falsely accused of rape and murder in Agra. He's in Agra district jail. He's been there for 7.5 years. And I'm using this case to look at the legal system. Because when Me Too happened, one of the things that we were always told, everyone was told, was, why are you coming to the court of social media? Go to the Indian law. And I anyway don't think the law and order approach is the right one. But what is Indian law? If that's the approach we're going to take, what is it? And how does it work? So I'm using it to critique the Indian law enforcement systems and see, yeah. So that's what I'm working on. I'm working on it with my closest friend. And the two of us.
Great topic, because when I was talking to a few of my male friends, about this panel, some of them were like, but then what about those women that, falsely accuse someone? And I know you have a whole rebuttal on, on that topic, and we might not have enough time to go over it today, but in like a couple of minutes, can you just give your point of view on that?
Okay, quickly. Gosh, I have so much to say on this, but I'm going to try and say it quickly. So the Indian law is being abused, but it's not being abused to the extent that we would like to imagine. This whole false rape complaint thing is one of the most pervasive rape myths across the world. And every time this rebuttal comes to me, the idea that women are, that women frequently and at an alarming pace make these false accusations of rape. I often want, my question is, what are they gaining from this? And also, To rebuttal this is the idea that actually 99.1% of rapes are not reported to the police. So a lot more men are getting away with it than the few that are being falsely accused. And also this false accusation of rape, if you actually break it down, 1/3 of the cases that are taken to court and called rape are when boys have had boys and girls have had of similar age have had consensual sex, and the parents are using the law to break up the relationship, and it's usually intercaste or interclass or interreligion. Now this is not rape, and it is an abuse of the law, but these men are not convicted. So that's one of the reasons rape conviction is at 24%. These boys are not convicted anyway. So the percentage that we're actually talking about is really, really small. The more critical thing, the thing that this diverts attention from the fact that 99.1% of men get away. So I don't want to talk about it because I can go on. I just don't think that is a that rape myth deserves much more attention than it gets already.
I have a question that came in. How are you able to isolate the mental disorder that a rapist might be suffering from their actions?
I wasn't. I'm not a trained psychologist or a psychiatrist. I wasn't. I did have 250 questions that I asked each of the men. It was the same questions, the same things I observed for all of them. And these questions were made with the help of a sociologist and an anthropologist. And so, I mean, they did cover a lot. They did have little bits from the hair test, which is the sociology. Sorry, the hair test is about psychopaths and sociopaths. So it had a few questions from there, but I mean, I'm not a psychologist, so for me, isolating their mental illnesses, if they had them, was not something I could do or set out to do.
Well, you're living proof. You've dealt it in your own way. And like you said, this book was your catharsis.
Mm-hmm.
Tara, where can people find your book?
I believe it's available on Amazon in the US as well. I mean, in India, it's available on Amazon and Flipkart, but I believe it's available on Amazon in the US.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time out. Thank you to all the viewers of Sakshi TV. Really appreciate you guys tuning in. And Tara, thank you so much for this. This is very helpful. I feel like a lot of people have gained something from just conversation. Thank you to everyone that joined. Please buy her book. Let's support, someone doing something good. This way we can see part 2 and 3 and 4. We can see the documentary as well. Again, her book is on Amazon. It's called Why Men Rape, an Indian Undercover Investigation. Thank you so much, Tara. I really appreciate you doing this and taking time out. Thanks once again, and I'm not sure if he's on still, but Puneet Ruparal for this introduction. Really appreciate it. And Sakshi TV viewers, once again, thank you so much for joining in, guys. If anyone has any last-minute questions, this is the time. Else we're gonna log off.
Okay, I think we're good.
I think we're good.
Thanks, everyone. Good night. See ya.
Thank you, everybody.